Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be going over some strength and conditioning for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes. Recently I've been doing a bit of content for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym that I go to, and we've been sort of talking about, okay, how can we make strength and conditioning and gym work a little bit more accessible. So I've decided to make a little bit of a video on this. I know if you watch the videos because you're interested in CrossFit or weightlifting, this might be a little bit different, but maybe there's some ideas here which can also translate into sort of what you're doing as well. So I personally coach two people who do jiu-jitsu, and I've coached several people in the past. At the moment I coach someone who is competing on a semi-regular basis. And then also I coach someone who is doing their training a little bit more just for the enjoyment of doing gym work, and they're combining that with their jiu-jitsu training as well. So what I've done is created a few different categories and a few different tiers, because the tiers seem to be the hot thing right now when it comes to listing out things on YouTube. But what I'm going to do is I'm also going to provide a bit of extra context behind that as well, and I'm going to sort of tell you how you can potentially structure some training and some of the ideas that I have around that. One of the key things that I think is often overlooked is that when you are early in your training or early in your your sort of sports career, as it were, the focus of gym work, the focus of strengthening and conditioning in the gym should primarily be working on enhancing your time in practice, and allowing you to stay a bit more resilient to the sport. So for jiu-jitsu, it should be training that's focused on keeping you strong so that you can train your jiu-jitsu harder, you can train for longer, and then if you are going to be coming across situations like small little injuries and that sort of stuff, you're able to bounce back quicker. I think a lot of the time people focus on, okay, I'm slow on the mats. I'm really slow going for a double leg, or I'm really slow transitioning from this position to this position. And I watch the people who are really good and who are better than me, and they are fast. So I need to be faster and I need to be more explosive. And this is conversations I've had with athletes in the past. So the tendency is, okay, I now need to do a lot of exercises which are based on that in the gym, and I need to specialize my training in the gym to develop this area of my game. The reason why those individuals are faster, and the reason why sports get quicker in the sort of the more that you develop on, is because of skill. It's because of their skills and their skill base, it's almost like they have more time to be able to do things. They would have come across certain situations a lot more, so they know how to move from one thing to the other. And it's not necessarily about their explosive power. Now, explosive power is going to come into play, but that's going to be more towards the elite level and the elite standard. But the main thing is, if your sport is very much based on skill, then you want your strength and conditioning to enhance your skill practice, your sports practice. So this is the outlook that I have. There is going to be an element where you are potentially doing little bits of things to try and improve someone's game or some area, but it's going to be more like an 80-20 rule, where 80% of the work is going to be about, hey, keeping you healthy, keeping you strong, and allowing you to enjoy your time on the mats, and allowing you to train harder for that type of stuff. So let's get into the different categories. So these are the sort of categories or areas of training which I've divided up. There is probably, several more, a lot more potentially that you can do, but I'm going to be talking mainly about just strength training. And the reason for that is because I believe for most people, the conditioning is going to come from their time on the mat. If they're able to do a little bit of extra easy cardio and that type of stuff, then I think that can be very helpful. But for a long time in someone's training career, they're not going to need to be doing really, really hard sprints or anything like that. And also I think that if I was to add conditioning elements in here and that type of stuff, that's probably just going to, that needs to be another video. So we're just going to focus on strength training as it pertains to the stuff that you would typically see in the gym. So in the essentials, we've got a upper push, upper pull, a hinge, and a squat. So these 4 categories are what many consider to be sort of like the basic movement patterns that we can perform in the gym, and then many of the exercises that we see are going to be derivatives of this. So for the upper push, we can work in a vertical or we can work in a horizontal pattern. For the upper pull, it's the same. So we can work rowing, which is going to be more horizontal, or we could be working pulling like a pull up or something like that, which is going to be more vertical. In the deadlift, we have hinging actions where we're holding on to the weights, so things like deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, and we also have hip thrusts. I don't necessarily think, I think deadlifts are always a better option than hip thrusts, and that's just because the range of motion that you're going to be working through, there's a lot more benefits to the exercise. But hip thrust seems to be very popular in jiu-jitsu for obvious reasons. It's like you are going to be in a bridged position sometimes. It's a little bit more floor-based and that type of stuff. But I'll be honest with you, I think you could probably get a lot more from just doing some deadlifting and learning how to do that. And it will also develop your sort of movement literacy. You'll pick up new things. Then we have squats. And for the squats, I think for jiu-jitsu athletes, back squat, front squat, and a Zercher squat are usually going to be, that's a good level of variation that you need. For the essentials, you don't necessarily need to be working too hard. I think 2 to 4 hard working sets, working around 1 to 3 reps in reserve is going to be good. Working in that 1 to 3 reps in reserve is going to keep things productive, but it's also going to keep you fairly safe. You're not going to be pushing weights to a maximum, and I don't necessarily think you need to do that, for a long time. For the rep schemes, we're looking at 5 to 10 reps, and I think I'm going to say working in that rep range and, nothing below that, because you can get really strong just working in those rep ranges. You don't necessarily need to be doing your singles, your doubles, your triples and that type of stuff to get stronger. You can work 5 to 10 reps, do that for a very long time, and you're not necessarily going to be running the risk of playing around with heavier weights. Anything more than that, you're going to be looking at other adaptations and not necessarily a strength adaptation. Now, going into the preferred list, this is going to be the type of stuff which, some might call it a little bit more athletic, but for the single leg squat or the lunge variation, this could even be in the essentials list, and the prescription for it would be the same for the essentials. But for this type of stuff, there's obviously the obvious benefits to it where you are working a little bit more balance. A lot of the time in jiu-jitsu, you're never going to be stood with your feet next to each other. You're always going to be in some form of split stance. So for this, it's going to be important that you're able to load up a single leg and get in on that leg. And also you're going to be challenging a lot of some different musculature around the hips and the lower leg when you're going through these variations, which maybe you won't get from your deadlifts or your squats. Then we have plyometrics and an explosive hinge. So these are going to be things which are on the faster side of movements. And if we think about strength being on one side, speed on being the other side, we're starting to move more towards this side, towards speed. So the plyometrics is going to be, I think this is going to be quite useful for jiu-jitsu athletes because you might not get exposure to this type of stuff in jiu-jitsu, especially if you are on the ground the majority of the time. And if you think about the stuff that you do in jiu-jitsu all the time, if you're training in the gym sort of broadens out and you start to work on different qualities that maybe you don't get access to in your, or you don't get the ability to develop in your actual sports training, this can be quite helpful, and this can just bring maybe another element to your game. For the explosive hinge, this is going to be somewhere sort of between that strength and that speed. So we're somewhere more towards the middle, and this is going to be your Olympic weightlifting variations. You could do weighted jumps and this type of stuff on this. But here, what you are doing is you're working with an external load explosively. But one of the added benefits to doing some, quite simple Olympic weightlifting variations is you're learning how to handle an external implement. You're learning how to generate force with that implement, but then also yield to that and accept that force. And I think that that's one of the things that you can get from this type of lifting that you potentially don't get from your more basic traditional strength training movements. And that ability to generate force and accept force is going to be something which is quite athletic, and it's quite important for people to be able to develop. Now, if say for example, with the explosive hinge and this type of stuff. Sometimes these are first things that people put into the program. But I think that if you aren't getting in the essentials already, this type of stuff, like, you can get a little bit of that benefit, these more explosive movements and that type of stuff. You can get that from these slower strength-based movements in the essentials list. So this is the reason why this is not in the essentials, is because if you're not doing basic compound barbell movements already, then this type of stuff is probably, you don't need it. It's unneeded. It's not unnecessary. We want to be working basic lifts first, and then we want to expand out and go into things which are a bit more explosive and athletic. And then after that, we've got optional, and then we've got extra. And this type of stuff is going to be, these are going to be things which are a little bit more specific to some of the things that we see in jiu-jitsu. These are the things we don't necessarily need to be training a lot of or training hard. But this is where you might be able to adapt your training a little bit and start to work on things which, you might have some small injuries or niggles that keep coming up and you need to work on it. These are also going to be starting to work on things which will maybe make you a bit more resilient to your jiu-jitsu, and I'll explain how so now. Okay, so for the core work, what we're looking at is basically closing the front of the body, and this is going to be a little bit more specific to that defensive position in jiu-jitsu, where you pull your knees up towards your chest, you pull your elbows down towards your ribs. So this type of work can be helpful for that, and I think that this is also just good to do to strengthen some of the positions that you find yourself a lot in jiu-jitsu. Spinal flexion and extension. This doesn't necessarily need to be trained hard or heavy, but I think this type of stuff can be good just to be able to accumulate time in these positions. You find yourself in, flexed over positions quite a lot in jiu-jitsu, so spending some time there can be quite helpful. You're going to be inverted. Someone's going to be pulling down on you whilst you're trying to resist that. So we need to get maybe a little bit more of a controlled exposure in the gym to these movement patterns, which allows us to be able to handle the chaos of what happens in jiu-jitsu a bit more. Arms. Direct arm work is going to be important. If you think about an arm bar, sometimes you might get caught in an arm bar and it hurts your elbow or something like that for a few days. If you have a little bit more dexterity through those joints and through if you have a bit more muscle mass around that area, that allows you maybe to bounce back a little bit quicker. If you have that reserve of strength, it's not going to it's not going to completely protect you, but it might just allow you just to stay keep training for a little bit longer. Grip. Obviously, grip is important in jiu-jitsu. I think generally, by and large, you are going to get a good amount of grip stimulus from just basic work on the barbell and gripping dumbbells, but adding in a little bit of extra grip can be quite helpful. Hips and groin, especially if you're going to play a more floor-based game and you're playing a lot more with guard and that type of stuff, and someone's pushing down on your legs and pushing them out to the side and that type of thing, you're going to have quite like high velocity movements where you're going to be stretched and pulled in different positions. So I think that having some strong hips and strong groins can be quite helpful. This is something which I have to personally include into my training on at least a weekly basis, just to be able to handle some of the positions that we find ourselves in jiu-jitsu. And then neck, obvious reasons, we're getting pulled forward all the time from the back of the head, whether it's a collar tie or a necktie, and this just allows you to stay a bit more resilient to that. I think for the neck work, you don't need to make this hard. You just might need to work in through different ranges of motion, going through full range of motion as best as you can, having a little bit of resistance there. It doesn't have to be too much, and just resisting a bit of movement. I think that can be quite helpful. So let's get into structuring this over the course of a week. So if you can only train 1 day per week, so this is probably going to be someone who struggles to actually get into training jiu-jitsu on a consistent basis, you would just do the essentials. You would just do a session focusing on the essentials. And I think if you spend about 10 minutes per exercise with a good thorough warm-up, you're probably looking at this session taking you about 50 minutes to an hour. And I think that if you only have time for one gym session per week, this is all you need to do. Just go through that, try to move it forward a little bit each week. It doesn't have to be too hard. It can be just adding a rep on each week. It could be adding a couple of kilos on each week, something along those lines. If you can train 2 days per week, this is going to be someone who maybe, okay, they know they can always get in that one gym session per week, and they always know that they can get in maybe 2 or 3 jiu-jitsu sessions per week, and then this is like the icing on the cake. They're able to get in that second gym session. In this situation, I would just start to work some of those elements which are a little bit more athletic. You're going to just be adding in those things from the preferred list. So these things on here, and they would be placed mainly at the beginning of the session, just because they're a bit quicker, they're a bit more explosive, and they will just sort of set you up for potentially better strength work later in the session. But also, if you were to do heavy squats before your plyometrics, or you're doing plyometrics at the end of the session, that will negatively affect your plyometrics, whereas it doesn't really work the same it doesn't work the same the other way around. Same with your explosive hinge before moving into more strength-based work. You want to make sure that you save your faster, more skill-based movements for the beginning of the session. If you can train 3 days a week, and this is probably someone who they might actually just like enjoy training and going to the gym, that might be just like a hobby that they have alongside doing jiu-jitsu. This is a little bit more of like how I personally train. For that individual, you would work things from the essential list, the preferred list. You would make sure you tick those off each week. And then what you can do is you can potentially add in things from the optional and the extra list, and you would just add these in on a sort of needs base. So if you know that you need a bit more direct arm work because your elbows flare up, or you just want jacked arms, you would put that type of stuff in, okay? So those extras, I would say that's going to be a little bit more based on what you personally need, and also like what you like to train as well. Now, 4 days a week, to be honest with you, this is going to be for the professional athlete. This is going to be for the person, the coach that works at a jiu-jitsu academy, who has access to the barbell, and maybe they do some lifting in the morning for 45 minutes, and then they do their jiu-jitsu training later in the day. Now, for this, obviously, we're working things from all the different types of lists. We're probably going to be breaking things up into like lower body one day, upper body another day, lower body another day. And one of the things I want you to notice is how the training sessions actually start to get shorter as you go through. So we're starting off with like 4 blocks of training on that first day. And then on day 1 of your 4-day week split, we've got plyometrics, heavy squats, going into some accessory work. And this session could take you 30 to 45 minutes. For the upper body type stuff, this ticks over a little bit quicker. So this could be, you could potentially do up to 4 things. And if you are training more in the gym, your training in the gym needs to be just a little bit easier, because you don't want to be applying as much stress. If someone is only able to get to the gym 1 day per week, and they're able to do their jiu-jitsu, so let's say 3 times per week, we can assume that their training on those 4 days, jiu-jitsu or in the gym, is going to be fairly intense. Like, that's going to be the only thing they go through. And they're going to be able to recover from it. They'll do a day of hard training, maybe 2 days, they'll take a day off. Maybe 2 more days, and then they take 2 days off. So they're going to have that recovery sort of inbuilt within their weekly structure. Whereas if someone is going to be doing 4 days of gym training per week, and let's say potentially they are doing their jiu-jitsu at another point during the day, they're going to have to do just a little bit less, and the training sessions have to be just a little bit easier, because they will be doing a lot more work. So they'll be doing a lot more volume, and they need to make sure that the recovery is sort of the recovery is implemented through this, and this is going to be big words, strategic design of the week, right? So the more things you do, the smarter you have to be about it. So hopefully you found some things quite useful there. If you have any questions, or if there's anything that was unclear or anything like that, just drop those questions in the comments, or you can contact me on social, and yeah, I'd be happy to help you out and answer any of those questions. And thank you very much for watching.